You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, a lot happening down in Florida where Judge Cannon is yet again facing off against Jack Smith's prosecutors. The question that we're facing right now is about the legality of even having a special counsel. And this is, an issue that Judge Cannon is looking into all as a predicate to be able to consider the question of dismissing this case altogether. But she may have actually stepped over the line here and endangered this whole trial on her behalf. Can you talk about what she did that might have been a little too far?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, first of all, she's litigating the question of whether special counsel should even be used, whether it's a thing, whether it's lawful. But, Brian, we've been using some version of the special counsel and independent counsel in our criminal justice system since the 1800s. And frankly, it's been attacked over and over and over again. And every single time it is ruled to be lawful. So this motion shouldn't be taking place at all. But of course, she's giving Donald Trump's lawyers all the time they want to litigate the issue of whether Jack Smith's special counsel is even a lawful appointment or procedure. So during the course of the argument, she said something that I found pretty alarming. And here's what it does, Brian. It continues to show that her impartiality is open to serious question, which means she should recuse from the case, or there should be a motion to remove her from the case if she won't do it on her own. She got really interested in how Jack Smith's prosecution is being funded. And let me tell you why that's a real problem. It might not jump out to our viewers as a serious problem, but there's this little thing in our constitutional construct of government called separation of powers. Guess what? Judges don't get to tell prosecutors how to do their business, just like they don't get to tell Congress how to do their business, and Congress has constraints about what it can do to control the executive branch or the judicial branch. It's that whole checks and balances thing we have, and a federal judge has absolutely no business inquiring about how the prosecutor is being funded. How much are they getting? How are those decisions made? What are the prosecutorial priorities at play? Brian, in my opinion, that violates the concept of a separation of powers. Federal judges don't get to poke their nose into the prosecution's business that way, but that's what she was doing, and I think it's a tell. It's a tell that she is like reaching for anything she thinks she can grab hold of to try to perhaps say, well, I find a real problem with this special counsel appointment, even if generally special counsel have been used, throughout our nation's history. I'm going to look for a reason to sort of delegitimize this one. But a secondary problem is, what is she doing when she even raises these issues? She's giving Donald Trump talking points, particularly in advance of Thursday's debate. Her impartiality is so open to question that I hope all of this information is being put in the disqualification bucket by Jack Smith, and maybe he went back to the Department of Justice and started drafting up a motion to remove her.
So in this kind of a situation where you have a judge who then dips her toes into something that should be the exclusive prerogative of the executive branch, how could that impact her role in this case?
It could lead to her disqualification if it sort of convinced Jack Smith to file the motion to have her removed, and ultimately the appeals court, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, deciding that, she should know better. She doesn't get to sort of look behind the prosecutorial curtain on issues such as funding. And let me just give our viewers a more basic example of how I have had to contend with a judge who was, in my opinion, sort of stepping over that constitutional line, the separation of powers. Every once in a while, judges are enthusiastic about getting a case resolved with a guilty plea. So the judge might say, well, Mr. Kirshner, what plea offer has been made? And I might say, for the sake of sort of ease of reference, well, Your Honor, the defendant is charged with first-degree premeditated murder, and we have extended a second-degree murder plea offer to the defendant, and he rejected it. What does that mean? Well, it means we're going to trial. And the judge might say, well, Mr. Kirshner, I'm urging you to consider a manslaughter plea, which is, far below a second-degree murder plea. And, I really am urging you to consider that, and the signal is clear. He's trying to tell me what plea offer to make. And here's the thing, Brian, that steps over the line because it violates the separation of powers. The judicial branch of government has absolutely no say in the plea offer decisions that the executive branch of government, the prosecutors, make. And I have had these circumstances creep up, and I would have to push back politely, professionally, but let the judge know, listen, it is our considered opinion, talking with the family of the victims and the community and the witnesses in the case, it is our considered opinion that second-degree murder is the appropriate plea offer. In all due respect, the court doesn't really have a role in the government's prosecutorial decisions. That is another version of what I see Judge Cannon wading into, something that she has no business wading into.
Now, just to be clear here, this alone, taken unto itself, might not be enough for Jack Smith to seek her recusal, but is it true that when you add this to the rest of the bucket of things that she's done wrong, including, the issues for which she was rebuked initially with the 11th Circuit, her bogus interpretation of the Presidential Records Act that might have led to erroneous jury instructions, her refusal to actually bring this case to trial, even despite the Trump team saying that they wanted August 12th as their selection for a date, the issues go on and on. So whereas taken alone, it might not be enough to warrant removal. Could this be added as one small thing in addition to a lot of other small things that could together result in adequate justification for Jack Smith to seek her removal?
Brian, you're exactly right. There's a clear pattern that has emerged, and in aggregate, no one thing standing alone would lead to her disqualification, would lead people to reasonably question her impartiality. In aggregate, I think the evidence of her lack of impartiality is strong. You just recited that whole parade of horribles. I mean, bogus jury instructions that she tells the prosecutors, I want you to assume these are correct formulations of law. No, they're not, and that is not the way judges ordinarily discuss proposed jury instructions with the parties. They will say, I am thinking about these instructions and I'd like to get your input. Not, I'm directing you to assume these are correct jury instructions. That's not the way this criminal litigation thing works. And let me add to your, pretty complete parade of horribles of what Judge Cannon has done, including refusing to set a trial date. Again, something I never encountered in my 30 years as a prosecutor. Usually the judge is desperate to set a trial date to clear the case off her docket. That's
right.
What judges do. They want to move their cases. And Donald Trump's lawyer said, August 12th works for us. And she said, nope, not setting any trial date. That is a little bit of judicial insanity in my experience. But here's the other thing to add to the parade of horribles. There was recent reporting that two of her colleagues, two of the federal judges who serve in her very jurisdiction, including her own Chief Judge Altanaga, appointed to the bench by George W. Bush, by the way, said, we are advising that you not preside over the Trump case because of the fact that you were reversed previously by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals for abusing your judicial discretion in favor of Donald Trump. At some point, Brian, we have to litigate a motion to recuse, because if we don't, then I don't think anybody will have confidence in the outcome of a trial if it is presided over by somebody whose impartiality is obviously in question.
And Glenn, help me understand this, because I know a lot of people watching this are all going to have the same thought, and that's okay. We have enough of a justification for Jack Smith to seek her removal, and yet it seems like despite all of this, this avalanche of evidence that would count against her, he refuses to do it. But then you look at someone like Jack Smith, and we've had this conversation offline as well, but you look at someone like Jack Smith, who is no pushover, and he has investigated war crimes, he's prosecuted war crimes at The Hague. Like, if ever there was somebody who would seem capable of taking on, someone like Donald Trump and these dumb, very transparent, dilatory tactics that he's putting forward, it would be Jack Smith. And so what seems to be, where does that, how do you reconcile those two things, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
It's a challenge, Brian, and I think you and I have talked about it a lot, and we both struggle to explain it because, yeah, Jack Smith is not timid. He is a strong, fearless, appropriately aggressive prosecutor. He's proved that over and over again by, for example, litigating the attorney-client privilege, penetrating it, and then forcing one of Donald Trump's own lawyers to go into the grand jury and testify and provide incriminating evidence against Donald Trump, the client. That is rarely done in my experience. So it's not because he is unduly timid. It's not because, in my opinion, he is afraid of antagonizing Judge Cannon because she couldn't be any more antagonistic to the prosecution in this case. I have to believe he wants some of these issues to be ruled on by Judge Cannon because it is going to give him perhaps all of the ammunition he needs to appeal these rulings, not only on the substance of the ruling, but given how unsupportable some of those rulings may prove to be based on the law or lack of supporting precedent, supporting case law, that may then give him everything he needs to bring a very strong motion to recuse, motion to remove her from the case. I have to believe Jack Smith has an overarching plan and an overarching goal. I will not attribute the lack of him filing this motion to timidity.
And you know, I'm in the same boat, and I think right now what we have to just assume, just if for nothing else than just by virtue of the fact that we have no choice right now, but just to assume that this guy who, again, prosecuted war crimes at The Hague knows what he's doing, that he has some plan, and that he is not just, you know, and that he's not just kind of whistling past the graveyard here. And by the way, it's not like Judge Cannon isn't giving him more and more and more justification to have herself removed at the end of the day. So, you know, we'll keep an eye on this case as it continues to progress, even if it's not progressing nearly as fast as we want it to. But hopefully, again, there is some game plan at the end of this. So with that said, for those watching right now, if you want to stay on top of this prosecution as well as the other prosecutions that Trump is contending with, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.